Hi friends, so I know that a lot of people who live in the US have some of you anyway on the left have a particular liking for Tulsi Gabbard, and I understand that because she's saying all the right things, mostly all the right things, but there are some problems, as I've mentioned, and I've had a couple of videos where I've talked about this. One was the Eyes Left podcast, but I wanted to share with you, I'm going to share with you some of the excerpts from the Christians United for Israel, CUFI, talk that Tulsi Gabbard gave in 2015. And I'll just run through what she talked about, and then I'll show you the talk. And just in case you don't know what CUFI, Christians United for Israel is, it's a very right-wing Christian group, and it has people like Nikki Haley speaking at events, and Nikki Haley is a warmongering neocon. It's an interesting choice for Tulsi Gabbard to be speaking at CUFI, but she seems to have quite a significant support for Israel, and which means that and I don't think she's in the dark about this, but I would say she knows about what Israel is doing to Palestinians at the fence, executing them, and she's put out tweets complaining about that, or sort of being opposed to that. But what does she think supporting Israel is doing? If you're supporting Israel, and in this speech, she talks about the continued support for Israel, meaning the financial support, which is $10 million a day, and just full-on support for Israel. That's what she's talking about in this speech to the Christians United for Israel. Now, I know that's 2015, but I don't really think that people can just change. That's about 2.5 years ago. I'm not sure that somebody can change that quickly from being a full-on supporter of Israel to, and this is 2015, which is after the 2014 assault on Gaza, which killed 550 plus children and killed over 1,000 adults. It's not even before the 2014, what they called, Israel called Protective Edge assault on Gaza. And Gaza is an open-air prison. They cannot really leave from there. Israel has put in a blockade there. And, so they're basically bombing people in a confined open-air prison. So, and they always use the excuse Hamas, as if Hamas is sprinkled throughout the areas, and it's just a thinly veiled genocide is what it is. So, for her to sort of continue in this 2015 speech to CUFI, she commits to full support of Israel and everything that means, the financial and the, everything else, and she praises Representative Inouye, who's died now, but he was a full-on supporter. He was a senator in Hawaii, and he even won an award from Israel for his support of Israel. So she praises Senator Inouye and all that he did. Now, and I don't think I have heard her say anything specific about the US support since then. I think she's laying low on her support of Israel and isn't really talking about it, which makes me really worry. There are other problems with her with the drone. She's okay with the drone program and talks about specific targeted strikes as if those strikes haven't already killed many, many civilians. She talks about being non-interventionist, but then when she talks about ISIS and the like, she sort of says she's a hawk. All that kind of talk. But anyway, she's all over the place like a dog's breakfast, really. I'll just sort of quickly run through some points, and then I'll show you this video. And just remember this talk to CUFI as she progresses in this presidential thing, and see what she says in these presidential debates. But anybody who's talking at a right-wing Christian event, the same event that people like Nikki Haley is talking at, is a worry. So anyway, and one of the things she said around that time was, "I know how important our enduring alliance with Israel is. My vote upholds my commitment to maintaining and strengthening this alliance. You know, I mean, that's with an apartheid state, a state headed at the present time by Netanyahu, who said that it's a Jewish state and other people don't matter. I mean, literally that's what he says, basically. I'll show you the quote. It was Cindy Sheen who sort of pointed me to this particular talk. And so she goes on, she says, we've had a long-standing, friendship with Israel, which is very important. She was talking about the threats against Israel. She's aware, these threats against Israel, Israel is sort of more likely threatening other countries, bombing Syria indiscriminately. It has a nuclear weapons program, which everybody tends to ignore. It hasn't signed up to the fact that it has nuclear weapons. It's not even a part of the registered countries that have it. ISIS never bothers Israel. It never goes into Israel and blows anything up. And Israel has actually, in fact, ISIS has actually apologized to Israel when they accidentally interfered with or bombed something that had something to do with Israel. You can take from that what you will. So anyway, in this talk, she talks about the threats against Israel she's aware of, and she praised Senator Inouye, which I've mentioned. She talked about the multi-layered defense system that Senator Inouye had, I don't know, helped. I'm not sure what he did towards that, but obviously he was for it. And she said, which saved many lives. Good Lord. I mean, if ever, Hamas sends, they're glorified, sort of fireworks, really, if you really look at the things that they send across. And it's sort of fairly rare. And yet Israel just bombs the bejesus out of Gaza. And I mean, Palestinians are an occupied race, and their country is they're like Gaza, they're refugees and they have the right to return. And they have the right to self-defense because they're occupied, right? Not that I'm advocating violence. I think it's probably much better that they keep to the non-violent position they have on the Great March of Return. And you can see with their non-violence in the Great March of Return how Israel responds to that. They execute people at the fence. There's been 180 unarmed Palestinians, 30 of them children, that have been executed while protesting at the fence of the open-air prison that is Gaza, and there's been 6,000 plus wounded, and all with live ammunition. That's how they treat Palestinians who are non-violent. Okay, so anyway, so she praises the multi-layered missile defense, and he won an award from Israel, and Tulsi Gabbard has won a Champion for Israel award, or Champion to Israel award as well. Then she mentions ISIS, and she talks about being a soldier and how important it is to know your enemy. She doesn't give any context with how ISIS has come about. Even Obama has admitted that they created a vacuum in Iraq, and that's how ISIS came about. And the US's greatest ally, Saudi Arabia, although that's a bit shaky at the moment, but that's because they don't like Mohammed bin Salman, but they like to use Wahhabism, which is originated, it's a distortion of Islam. Even a lot of Muslims reject it, right? Wahhabism is something that is used by the US as a political tool to go throughout the Middle East and destroy each country and have a managed chaos situation and take their resources. And Saudi Arabia has helped them in this. That's where Wahhabism has originated. So, she doesn't give any context for anything. It's like ISIS magically appeared, and she attributes ISIS and other sort of groups that are other groups in, say, Syria, like al-Nusra and the like, all Islamic, she calls it Islamic extremism. And she goes on to sort of say that it's really a battle of ideologies now. I don't know if she's conflating Islam with Wahhabism, which is wrong. As I said, many Muslims reject Wahhabism, and it's a distortion of Islam. So, but she talks about this battle of ideologies. Well, that's the same sort of thing that Pompeo sees that there's a, Secretary Pompeo sees that there's a battle between Islam and Christianity. Pompeo also believes in the rapture, you know, where at the end of the world, where people, the good people ascend up into the sky and the rest of us are damned, kind of thing. He believes in that, or claims to believe in it, because, you know, he's full-on supportive of Israel. And anyway, it's a bit of a mess. But anyway, she goes on, she quotes Sun Tzu, The Art of War, about knowing your enemy and all of that. She goes into this big warrior kind of thing. Then she lists the Islamic extremists, and the Islamic extremists, she calls them, who wage war in the US today. You see, using that word Islamic extremists, you know, why not explain the difference between that, which is Wahhabism, and actual Islam? This conflation, you know, is really, really unfortunate. Anyway, she lays out a strategy for taking military action, and she says, you know, working with regions on the ground to defeat ISIS. Now, I realize this is 2015, and ISIS was much more of a threat. You know, even though the US has helped fund ISIS, they literally have, and been funding them and helping them move across, actually protecting them militarily. That's been sort of proven. And so, you know, so there's more of a focus on ISIS in this speech. But then she goes on to say, she then says madrasas where Islamic extremists are radicalized. Well, that's just Islamophobia, really. That's what that is. How about Wahhabism and also bombing the bejesus and occupying, you know, people's countries in the Middle East may cause some discontent, and then people want to, you know, rise up. There's that. But also, ISIS is being used by the US to help destabilize different countries in the Middle East. You know, as I said, and Tulsi Gabbard, oddly enough, Tulsi Gabbard actually introduced a bill, I think it was last year, for the US to stop supporting, I think it was stop supporting ISIS or stop supporting, it was basically something like that. And I don't know if she actually got anywhere with that bill. Maybe somebody can leave a comment about it. It's very confusing. But see, this is what I mean. It's like you really don't know where, you know, where she really is. Like she has a history of Islamophobia. She really has. If you read that article in Jacobin, I'm not a fan of Jacobin for a couple of reasons I won't go into, but anyway, it sort of said what the left needs to know about Tulsi Gabbard, right? And they talk about, you know, her support for Israel and all of that, and then they talk about, you know, the various Islamophobic type things, bills that she's supported. So, you know, I'm just not sure that somebody can kind of go from that full-on sort of where it's the big Islamic threat. You know, it's all threat as far as she's concerned, you know? And there's no context to anything. And she really has a problem with Iran. Now, that fits in very well with the sort of, when you're pro-Israel, you have to have a problem with Iran. That just goes with the territory. And she vilifies Iran with the best of them. You know, they've got a nuclear weapons program and they're itching to use it, and they're a threat to Israel and they're a threat to the United States. That's funny. I mean, let's just stop for a moment and think, how many countries has Iran invaded? And how many countries has the US been overthrowing democratically elected governments or attempting to overthrow? Well, the US, I think at this point, it's 81, I think, and counting, attempted overthrows or successful overthrows of democratically elected or just in governments in particular in the world since 1946. I'm not sure how many countries Iran has invaded in this last century, but I don't think it's I don't think it's many or any at all. I don't think so. Not that I can recall. So I don't know, who is the threat, you know? But I mean, it's okay when we do it. Anybody else who's trying to defend themselves or wants a nuclear program to defend themselves from the US, that's a no-no. You must not do that. And if you do that, we will punish you. And they put economic sanctions on Iran. And they put economic sanctions on DPRK. If DPRK did not have a nuclear weapons program, they would be dragging Kim Jong-un through the streets just like they did with Gaddafi and do all sorts of unspeakable things to him. And they would have installed their own dictator, and they would be pillaging the country right now. That's the truth. So if Kim Jong-un ever gives up his nuclear weapons, he can expect a speedy execution or a dragged-out execution, literally, through the streets. And his country, or the country, the people of DPRK, it's not his country, the people of DPRK will then have to endure another terrible assault like they did in the early 50s when the US murdered a fifth of their population, a couple of million people. So anyway, she really goes on about the threat of Islamic extremism and says, and this is interesting how she said, so we can stop future 9/11s. Well, it was Saudi Arabia. There was actually 90% of the people engaged in the 9/11 attacks were Saudis. And in fact, a lot of victims' families have actually been suing Saudi Arabia for this. Saudi Arabia, in fact, I think it was one of the senators that spoke to the Real News Network, his name escapes me, he talks about the 28 redacted pages in relation to 9/11. And he said, they're redacted, and he said he can't actually talk about it, but somebody else talked about it, because he's still under a gag order about it, but somebody else talked about it, and they said that it was full of Saudi princes' names. It's full of them, as a group that was related to the 9/11 attacks. So Saudi Arabia, so it's interesting, she's talking about, you know, she doesn't mention that, but she just brings out the same old crap that all the others bring out, you know, that, I mean, if she was being truthful, she would say that Saudi Arabia was involved in the 9/11 things. But Saudi Arabia and Israel are allies. They're partners in crime with the US. Saudi Arabia is a brutal head-chopping monarchy, literally a dictatorship where they execute people in the public square, literally, and hang them up on cranes, beheaded people hung up on cranes, and they're incredibly oppressive towards women and a whole bunch of other things, right? Israel, of course, is an white ethno-supremacist state. It's an apartheid state, literally, and they execute Palestinians anytime they feel like it with impunity. There's no accountability for it. It's an ongoing genocide of Palestinians. So they're the two main allies of the US empire. So talk about extremism. If ever there was two countries that are extremist, it's those, and the US. She talks about Iran being a great threat, and that they need to sort of reduce sanctions only if they'll reduce their nuclear program. Well, they don't really have much of a nuclear program, but they're starting to really up it because they can see all the saber rattling towards Iran. I mean, you've heard it, Pompeo constantly vilifying Iran, John Bolton constantly vilifying Iran, the Democrats constantly vilifying Iran. The US empire has been vilifying Iran ever since Iran rejected the Shah when Mossadegh was overthrown and the Shah was installed. Iranians rejected that Shah, which was installed by the US. The US led that coup in Iran, and they've never forgiven the Iranians for getting rid of the Shah. It's been constant vilification since then. And Israel wants every single Middle Eastern country under a sort of US-managed chaos. Every country that isn't submitting to the US, they want pretty much destroyed and overthrown. And that's why they're working on Syria, and Israel is helping by indiscriminately bombing. And that's why they're trying to invade, they want to invade Iran, and they've made that very clear. And that will be a disaster, a huge disaster if they do that. But anyway, so that's Tulsi Gabbard. That was from 2015. Now I know she's talking a lot of anti-interventionist stuff, but then she sort of being okay with the drone program, and then this sort of thing that I've talked about here. I don't think that things that she said, her support of Israel, I don't think that can suddenly go away. I really don't. She's had photo opportunities with Adelson. She's even introduced a bill that Adelson was a part of. Adelson is funding Trump, was funding Trump and mostly funds the GOP. Adelson is a big supporter of Israel and is got a target. Iran is in his crosshairs, and so that's why Trump has been talking about Iran ever since he got into office, because the GOP is being funded heavily by Adelson, and Adelson has funded Donald Trump. So there's this tit for tat thing. So this is what he gets in return, Iran. So anyway, Tulsi Gabbard has been sort of friendly with Adelson. So it's not looking good. It's not looking good, and I see that, just that alone. And if she's pretending that she really doesn't hold that kind of support for Israel just by not talking about it, that's not good enough for me. And if she still has that kind of support, which I'm guessing she probably does, then that should be a complete deal breaker for people, because that's basically supporting an apartheid state where they're carrying on a genocide, an ongoing genocide of Palestinians. And she knows about that. She's not stupid. She knows about that. So you can't have it both ways. You can't be complaining and opposing what they're doing, what Israel is doing at the border with snipers shooting unarmed Palestinians and killing them and injuring thousands and shooting children and bragging about it on Twitter. They actually bragged about having a child in the crosshairs. You can't do all of that. And you can't brag about getting 2 for 1 if you shoot a pregnant woman, which they literally have a T-shirt. The Occupation Army, the IDF, the Israeli Defense, in quotes, forces, wears T-shirts where they have a pregnant Palestinian woman and they talk about it being a 2 for 1. You can't have things like that going on. And many Israelis openly talking about genocide of Palestinians, openly in the streets. You can't have it both ways, where you complain about, and oppose Palestinians being killed, executed at the fence of the open-air prison that is Gaza, and support Israel, and say you want to support Israel, financially, $10 million a day, and everything else, and see them as a great ally. That does not make sense. You can't have it both ways. So, I don't know. I just feel like this could be a great deception, and being silent about it doesn't mean that she isn't on board with still, like Israel could not continue to oppress Palestinians without financial support from the US, without that $10 million a day. Could not continue that apartheid state with that support, without that support. So, I think people need to call her out on it and actually keep on asking and over and over about what is her position on Israel, about the financial support and everything else. What is her position? Really push her on that, even though the problem is that politicians, they lie to get elected. That's the problem. Who can even say if it's even true if she says she's, she's mellowed on that. But she has to be more than just silent about it. People have to push that. Anyway, that's really all I wanted to say about that. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be a naysayer about people. I wish that she was on point about everything. I really do, and I really do. I wish just, I wish that. But I mean, if she was on point about everything, then she probably won't even get a look in anyway, because she's been talking about anti-interventionism, and also that the Democratic Party have already selected their person Kamala Harris, who loves imprisoning black people and joking about it, literally. And so they've already picked her, and they're probably going to pick Beto, who's has a very wealthy partner, like really wealthy partner, so he's another oligarch. So they've got, you know, Kamala Harris and Beto, Mr. waving his hands around, Beto O'Rourke, whose real name is Robert, but Beto sounds a little bit sort of multicultural, doesn't it? That all goes together. And he looks like a Kennedy, so we don't have to worry. He looks like a Kennedy, so everything will be okay, right? So anyway, the Democratic Party's already picked probably picked those two, but definitely Kamala Harris. And nobody else is going to get a look in, because they've even said in a lawsuit that they have every right, the DNC has every right to pick whomever they want. They literally sit in the back rooms with cigars and they decide who they want. And she's already been ordained, already been selected by the wealthy donors and the superdelegates, etc. So she's well on her way. So people like Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard won't really get a look in. So anyway, but people seem to ignore that fact. I don't know why. They're still giving out their money. It's so sad. It's just like you can see people are so desperate. The bar gets very low sometimes when people are desperate. And people forget, you know, the DNC has already said they have every right to pick who they want. So voting in the primary is not going to make a whole lot of difference. I mean, look at Bernie Sanders. He threw that last primary. He could have called them out, and he chose not to. And people were begging him to call out the DNC, and that was rigged, and that was stolen from him, and he refused to do it. Why do people think that he's going to call them out again this time? Why do people think he's going to do that? Because he probably wants to keep on serving until he dies. And if he doesn't, if he makes an enemy of the Democratic Party, they'll put up somebody against him and knock him out. You know, he's made this Faustian deal with the Democratic Party, and they've pretty much left him alone to keep winning in Vermont. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. So thanks very much for watching. Please hit the like button if you like the content. Please leave comments if you like. And also, you know, subscribe and click the notifications bell, otherwise you don't receive updates. Thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. And please stay tuned for this speech by Tulsi Gabbard at Kufi, where she demonstrates her support for Israel. Bye for now.
Aloha. Thank you very much, David, for your kind words of introduction, and thanks to Kufi and to all of you for such a warm welcome and the invitation to join you on such a critical and important day. Congratulations as well on the 10th anniversary of this Washington Summit and record attendance this year. The timing could not be more appropriate. If you'll allow me a little personal moment here, I have my aunt and uncle here from Moline, Illinois. Kelly and Bill Davis, somewhere in the crowd. There they are. Today's a big day, and each of us here in this room, and many of my friends down the road, we have our work cut out for us. So as we begin, I want to share something that's personally very special and I think important to keep in our hearts as we go forward, and that is the power and the true meaning of the word aloha. I come from Hawaii, a very special place, and oftentimes when you visit there, or people who come from there, you hear the word aloha thrown around, often used to say hello or goodbye, but it's a word with a much deeper meaning that expresses a sentiment that is very appropriate as we stand here together today seeking to unite people around a cause and a purpose that is higher and greater than ourselves. It's a word and a philosophy to live by today and every day. The first part, alo, means to share, literally, and ha, in the deepest sense of the word, means the breath of life. So aloha means I come to you with sincere respect and with an open heart. Aloha allows us to transcend the many labels and divisions that often separate us and tear us apart, and instead see each other truly for who we are, all as children of God. Unfortunately, every day when we turn on the news or we have conversations in the supermarket, we become aware of the deep divisions that exist within our country. That unfortunately, rather than seeing first what we share in common, unfortunately, too often people focus first on the things that divide us. And nowhere is that more magnified than here in Washington. Whether there are battles around a specific issue or there are purely blind partisan fights, the end result is that our country suffers, families struggle, and we don't maximize the potential that exists for our country. It's far easier to cast a disparaging eye on those who disagree with us, and much harder to find the good in that person, to see where there is common ground that will allow us to move forward together. In my life and in my work, I've been grateful to constantly have the opportunity to go back and reflect on some of my experiences, whether it was digging foxholes during military training in the woods of Alabama, or during my deployment to Iraq, where I served in a medical unit. In all these situations, I had the privilege of serving with people from all over the country, people of every race, every nationality, every religion, with a variety of different backgrounds and upbringings. In all of these situations, we worked as one team. We were united around the flag that we wear on our shoulder, united around our common goals and our shared mission, serving our country and taking care of each other. The same principles apply here. When I look around the room here today, I see many different diverse faces, people from all over the country, each of us bringing something very unique to the table. We have the opportunity to do great things, to make great changes, only if we stay focused on our common goal, on our common mission, and that is taking action that's in the best interest of the American people and our country. There are many issues that we deal with on a daily basis in Congress that are very divisive, but I can tell you without a doubt that the importance of our nation's long-standing friendship and partnership with Israel is not one of them. It's absolutely true to say that there are few issues that bring us together more, few issues that cause people to set aside their differences more than the issue of the United States' long-standing friendship with Israel. As a kid growing up in Hawaii, the challenges and threats that have faced Israel for so long and continue to present these challenges today are frankly not something that confronted me as I went surfing and played on the beach in Hawaii as a kid. But later in life, this changed through both of my Middle East deployments and learning from the example set by one of Hawaii's senators, the late U.S. Senator Daniel Inouye. Sounds like you know a little about him. He's a World War II veteran, Medal of Honor recipient, and lifelong champion for Israel. He was instrumental in ensuring that American military aid to Israel was transformed from loans to grants, assured that Israel could purchase the most advanced American weapon systems and develop such systems of its own, and led the U.S. support for multi-layered missile defense in Israel, something that, as all of you know, saves people's lives every single day. Shortly after he passed away in December of 2012, Israel chose to name an Israeli military missile facility after Senator Inouye, the very first time ever in history an honor has been bestowed on a non-Israeli. Anyone who goes to Israel in the Middle East will tell you that it's a complicated region. I began to see and experience this first as a soldier, as a concerned American, and now as a member of Congress. I have the privilege of serving on both the House Armed Services Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where through these jurisdictions I've spent much of my time in Congress very focused on ensuring our nation's security in the face of a rising threat from Islamic extremists and an Iran that continues to threaten Israel and the United States. Keeping the best interest of the American people at the forefront of what I do has been critical to maintaining clarity on these many issues that unfortunately can be drowned in partisanship and gridlock. Over a year ago, as we saw this group called ISIS begin to take center stage in the world, I spoke out strongly on the need for action to prevent this threat from entering our homeland. As a soldier, I know firsthand how important it is to understand and identify your enemy. In the art of war, Sun Tzu says, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So whether they're called ISIS or Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, or Al-Nusra, all of these groups are of the same brand of Islamic extremists who attacked us on 9/11 and who continue to wage war against us today. Understanding who they are and the radical ideology that motivates them and their barbaric actions is absolutely necessary for us to build a winning and effective strategy to defeat them. It's not a war that can be won on a single front. In order to truly defeat these extremist terrorists, there must be a three-pronged strategy. First, to take decisive, strategic military action, working with regional partners on the ground. Second, take a country-by-country or region-by-region approach to supporting political solutions that will take away the oxygen that has allowed groups like ISIS to exist and thrive. And third, take actions to counter the radical Islamic ideology that's fueling their terror, which is being inculcated in a new generation of terrorists through madrasas and being used to recruit foreign fighters from around the world. Without a strong and proactive strategy in each of these areas, we can expect this continued rise of extremism around the world with further 9/11-style threats and the possibility of lone wolf attacks on the homeland increasing, as we're seeing occurring in other parts of the world. I actually had the opportunity to visit the Middle East about a week ago and just returned, where I saw with fresh eyes the situation on the ground. Our first stop was in Kuwait City, where the day before we arrived there, ISIS claimed responsibility for a suicide bomber who walked into a mosque during Friday afternoon prayers and detonated himself, killing 27 people and injuring hundreds more. Immediately after landing in Kuwait, we went and offered our condolences to the family members of those who were killed in this attack, people who not a day before they were spending time with. Amid their grief, they expressed their deep and sincere gratitude and appreciation for our being there and taking a stand to fight against this common enemy. In Iraq, we spent time both in Baghdad and in Erbil, where what I have long known and have been advocating for was affirmed in person, that we need to strengthen our military partnership with the Kurdish people by providing them with the heavy weapons they need as they continue to show their great success in their fight against ISIS, their troops courageously fighting on the ground every single day, on the front lines, supported by our air cover. They spoke to us about how the Peshmerga are facing heavily armored vehicles filled with explosives. Think 5-ton trucks surrounded by armor, filled to the brim with explosives, driven by ISIS suicide bombers directly into villages and military encampments. People in surrounding communities said that as they see these bombs explode, they felt like it could have been an atomic bomb. The only thing that can stop these attacks from these weapons are heavy anti-tank missiles, which we're not supplying nearly enough of. The Kurds are the only force that we've seen consistently hold its ground against ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, and they currently provide sanctuary and critical humanitarian support to over 2 million ethnic and religious minorities, including the Yazidis and Christians in Iraq, without any support coming from Baghdad. So as you can imagine, the picture was very different when we arrived in Baghdad the next day. Prime Minister Abadi continues to plead to Iran for more support, ensuring Iran's influence in Baghdad is solidified, and that the Iranian-led Shia militia have a run of show throughout his government and around the country. Meanwhile, even though the names have changed, Prime Minister Maliki's sectarian policies of persecuting the Sunni tribes persist, which continues to increase the oxygen that allows ISIS to remain in Iraq in traditional Sunni territories. As a veteran of the war in Iraq, I've seen firsthand this harsh reality of war, that if you don't know and understand your enemy, you can't defeat them. To protect the American people, we must recognize that 9/11, as well as the recent violent attacks that we've seen in Paris and elsewhere in the world, are rooted in this Islamic extremist ideology. That this is as much an ideological war as it is a military war, and that we've got to understand that ideology in order to defeat it. This isn't just about one group called ISIS or another group called Al-Qaeda. It's about an overall threat posed by their radical ideology. Separately, yet right alongside this threat, is another consuming concern in the region and around the world, and that is the ambitions of Iran, especially as they seek to remain a nuclear power even as these negotiations conclude and an agreement has been announced. Before Congress takes a vote on whether or not to lift sanctions on Iran, these details must be examined carefully because, as you know, the devil is in the details. I have long advocated for anytime, anywhere inspections in order to ensure that any potential agreement can actually be enforced. It's easy to say that there's no trust between our two countries, but without that mechanism for verification, then any potential agreement really becomes a joke. Without the IAEA having this open inspection ability on all sites, including military sites, the global community cannot be assured that Iran is complying with any deal. Any sanctions relief must be tied to Iran's compliance to the deal. There are many lessons that are important for us to learn from failed North Korea negotiations in the past, where now we face a North Korea that not only is nuclear armed, but has intercontinental ballistic missiles that continue to grow in their capability. And this is one of them. First, removing sanctions in good faith takes away any incentive for Iran to comply with the deal. And to me, it actually serves as an invitation to break it. The impacts of this deal are real. And it's critical that we learn from lessons of the past. And this is why it's so important that Iran come clean on their past nuclear activities, which they've been dodging for far too long. We all know that Iran has a growing ballistic missile program. We don't want to make the same mistake with Iran that was made with North Korea. The failure to stop the North Korean regime from developing nuclear weapons has resulted in an unacceptable threat to the United States. North Korea's long-range missiles, coupled with their nuclear warhead stockpile, is something that hits home for me personally in a very direct way, where Hawaii and the west coast of the United States sit squarely within the crosshairs of Pyongyang. We cannot let this happen with Iran, which has a much more sophisticated missile system than North Korea, and they're prepared to use it. Tehran has been on a race toward nuclear weapons for years, and now it is our opportunity and responsibility to make sure that that pathway is blocked. Later this morning, actually, I'm going directly from here to a House Foreign Affairs Committee where we will go over this deal from Iran. And as we begin this process of careful examination, it's important that we do examine it carefully, that we do go over these details, not only members of Congress, but the American people. I feel privileged and grateful to have had the opportunity to serve our nation in uniform and to continue that service now here in Congress. And it's in the memory of many of my friends who never made the long trip home that I strive to uphold the warrior ethos that they lived and died by. I intend to carry on in their memory as we all work together in our shared commitment of a strong U.S.-Israel partnership, placing the mission first as we work towards a more secure, stable nation and future. Thank you very much. Aloha. Thank you.